Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. And today I'd like to continue on with a year-long series of the films of 1973. What did films look like then to me as I was around 50 years ago to watch most of these films? And what do they look like today? How have they changed through the scope of time? So my last two videos were on the films The Wicker Man and The Laughing Policeman. So sort of police investigation stories. This is a private investigator story, and it is The Long Goodbye, starring Elliott Gould, directed by Robert Altman, from a novel by Raymond Chandler, featuring his private investigator, Philip Marlowe. This is the first time The Long Goodbye, written in 1953, had been filmed. Most of the other Marlowe novels had been filmed. But this is the most unusual Philip Marlowe. You would never guess that Elliott Gould would even be cast as Philip Marlowe, and will give a very effective performance as Philip Marlowe. So Chandler wrote this book in 1953. But it's really like a 1930s, 1940s pulp fiction type, hard-boiled fiction. And in the opening scene of the movie, Marlowe's in bed. His cat has woken him up in the middle of the night. She wants food. Marlowe is sleeping in a disheveled, rumpled up suit that he wears throughout the movie. And in the commentary by Robert Altman and Elliott Gould that's included on this Kino release, they refer to him as Rip Van Marlowe. In other words, he's been sleeping for 20 years. So this is a 1953 character roaming about through a 1973 world, the world of Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is a big character both in the novel and in the movie. The finicky cat who wakes him up is played by Morris the cat, who was in a whole series of famous cat food commercials back in the 70s. So, but the next scene, after he feeds his cat with the cat food that trying to disguise a different cat food because he's unable to get curry brand cat food for his cat, and the cat takes off. And then at the door arrives Terry Lennox. This is, in the movie, he's a longtime friend of Marlowe. He comes in, he drives a fancy car. He comes up to see Marlowe, and with scratches on his face. We see his bruises on his hand, but he covers that up with gloves. And he tells Marlowe that he's had another fight with his wife. He needs to go off to Mexico until everything cools off, and would Marlowe drive him there, which he does. So this is very much, both the book and the movie is very much a story of friendship. The whole trajectory of the movie and the novel come out of this friendship, this bond that Philip Marlowe has with his friend Terry Lennox. And when the next day, and Marlowe does in fact drive Terry Lennox to Mexico, but when he gets back, he discovers that Terry Lennox's wife, Sylvia Lennox, has not only been beaten up, she has been murdered. He cannot believe that Terry Lennox would be capable of doing that murder. So, and then the plot, and I reread the book. I read all of Chandler many, many, many years ago, but I reread the novel as part of this omnibus. Long Goodbye is included in here. And I read it, and Chandler wrote some long detective novels. So I think this one's over 400 pages, whereas most of these kind of novels are 200 pages. But of course, he was brilliant at dialogue. If you've ever seen Double Indemnity, much of the dialogue in Double Indemnity, the the hard-boiled patter, comes from Raymond Chandler. So then Marlowe gets involved with an assortment of people, violent hoodlums. In the novel, there's a whole bunch of different hoodlums involved in the plot. Chandler tended to overpopulate his novels. So we get violent hoodlum, one violent hoodlum here. We get an alcoholic writer that seems based a bit on Ernest Hemingway, perhaps even on Chandler himself, who was an alcoholic. The wealthy, we get a picture of the wealthy enclave in Malibu, quack doctors, but it's basically LA. It's a snapshot of LA 1973, just as in the novel, Raymond Chandler was giving a snapshot of LA in the 1950s and 40s. And it's all about money and greed and corruption, the corruption of the spirit, of the soul. Marlowe is the errant knight, and he has a moral code, and friendship is part of that moral code, to be sure, and also an affection that he has for the alcoholic writer. He doesn't even seem to be interested all that much in money. But when Altman was offered this movie to direct, I think Peter Bogdanovich had been associated with maybe Brian Hutton. He loved the ending. He had never read the book, but he loved the ending. When he got to the ending of the script, he said, "I'll make it, but you gotta let me keep that ending." This was for United Artists, probably the one Hollywood studio that was very supportive of creative people. And now Lee Brackett, who did the screenplay for this film, she also, in her early days, she was she wrote science fiction stories for the pulps, and then she started writing crime stories, crime novels. A Hollywood studio picked her up. She was assigned to work the screenplay for The Big Sleep, another Philip Marlowe, and probably the most famous Philip Marlowe, Humphrey Bogart, for Howard Hawks. So she was assigned to write the script with William Faulkner, who was another alcoholic writer who could never quite finish scripts. And so I think she gets a joint collaboration in the screen credits. And she went on to write a whole bunch of screenplays, but especially for Howard Hawks. She wrote the screenplay for Rio Bravo, for instance. So she was a well-respected screenwriter, but they took some liberties with it, to say the least. Altman was not, hers was, she definitely changed the changes in the novel for the movie that I think really worked well. They evidently were Lee Brackett's ideas, the changing of the ending especially. So they had a kind of jokiness. Marlowe's always talking to himself, and he's just muttering, when he sees the various craziness of life around him. "It's okay with me," is his line. And then there's the song, the song that's used throughout. "It's a long goodbye," and they use it. That's the score. That little bit of the music is used throughout. So if somebody rings the doorbell, it's a version of that tune. And then everywhere you go, car radios, piano bars, even in Mexico. Marlowe goes to Mexico, and the local band is marching through the street, and they are playing a sort of Mexican version of the music, "The Long Goodbye." "Long Goodbye." This music was written by John Williams, and the lyrics were written by Johnny Mercer, and there's only one other piece of music in the film. It opens and closes with "Hooray for Hollywood" from a couple decades, 2 or 3 decades earlier, and Johnny Mercer wrote the lyrics to this and to "Hooray for Hollywood." So there's connections here. There's lots of connections back to the past and to the present of 1973. So Lee Brackett, when she saw the film after they made some very, very major rewrites of certain characters, and Elliott Gould was with her after the first preview. She was there for the first preview, and Elliott Gould says, she's going to hate this, what we did. Instead, she came out and said, no, it's really good. I think you really made a Marlowe and a Long Goodbye for the times that we're living in. But in reading the novel, I have memorized the movie. I've seen it so many times since 1973. I was just thrilled by her adaptation and the way she took the plot, because even in The Big Sleep, Lee Brackett and Faulkner asked Raymond Chandler, who killed who here, as they were trying to figure out the plot, and Chandler said, I don't know. It gets so convoluted. You can never make a movie out of the novel Long Goodbye, which is considered one of Chandler's best novels, if not his best. It is a very well-written novel, but it gets very intricate. It's tough to figure out the motivations, and but what Lee Brackett does is she streamlines it. I think it's brilliant. I really do, because when she changes the last part, and the movie, which has been very jokey up to a certain point, when there's a suicide in the narrative, it then becomes very, very serious, and the jokiness has a different tinge to it. It's not quite funny anymore. And also there's the improvisations by Elliott Gould and some of the other cast members. You can clearly see he's improvising. I'm not crazy about improvising because of the fact you can see it, but they really do work well. And they basically come in the first half of the film. And Gould wears this same suit. He drives his own car. He drives this classic car from the 1930s or 40s, but this was actually Gould's car. I have to talk about the Offbeat casting, which is really emblematic of many of Robert Altman's films. The alcoholic writer, played by Sterling Hayden, himself an alcoholic writer. He was, of course, a movie star in the 50s and 40s and 50s and 60s, but then he became a writer. He wrote very well-received memoirs. He was always out sailing the seven seas. It was originally intended for Dan Blocker, who was Haas on the Bonanza, highly popular Bonanza show. And Robert Altman had directed quite a few episodes of Bonanza, but unfortunately Dan Blocker passed away a couple months before they were filming. So Sterling Hayden came aboard. He's fantastic in this movie. He really is. His wife was played by Nina Van Pallant, who isn't famous today, but she was famous in 1973. And in fact, even before that, in Europe, her and her singing partner sang Puff the Magic Dragon, which was Peter, Paul, and Mary sang the hit version of that, I believe, in the U.S. But she was involved with Clifford Irving, one of the big fake cases. It's in Orson Welles' movie F for Fake. Clifford Irving was publishing a biography of Howard Hughes that he said was authorized, but it was not. And Nina Van Pallant was Clifford Irving's mistress. But she's a beautiful. She just fits Malibu, that whole world of Malibu, so well. Henry Gibson plays the quack doctor. He's very short and diminutive. He has to stand up to Sterling Hayden, who's like 6'4". Henry Gibson, known to me mostly for Laugh-In. He was one of the regulars on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In in the 70s. Terry Lennox, played by Jim Bouton. Jim Bouton was a relief pitcher for the New York Yankees. He himself, too, was a writer. He wrote a best-selling book about baseball called Ball 4. Probably the most significant offbeat casting, or one you're going to remember, is Mark Rydell playing Marty Augustine. He is the gangster. And there's a scene of violence. He actually rewrote his part when it was offered to him. It was sort of a standard gangster. He said, Bob, I can make this so much better, and the two of them worked on it. And he wrote himself as a Jewish gangster who has self-disgust because he has to do dirty work on the Sabbath. But there's a scene of shocking violence here that is so memorable. Every time I know it's coming, every time I see it, it just gives me the shudders. And then he has a later scene where he is threatening similar violence to Marlowe, and with his group of thugs. And one of the members of his group of thugs, who has not a line in the film, but you can't take your eyes off him, because this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think he was billed as Arnold Strong here. He couldn't speak English well enough, according to the commentary, really to give him anything in the way of lines. But he's there, and you see him next to Mark Rydell and standing around. He takes his shirt off and flexes all those muscles. And they had just mentioned that Ronald Reagan, or alluded to the fact that Ronald Reagan, an allusion to Ronald Reagan, who at the time of the filming was the governor of California. And in the very next scene, we see Arnold Schwarzenegger, a future governor of California, both in or at least mentioned in The Long Goodbye. So the reception was cool to The Long Goodbye. People didn't know what to make of it. It did not open in Philly. It opened in LA and Chicago, another big city. Didn't get good reviews, didn't do good business. United Artists was kind of stymied by that. They thought they had a good picture and one that should have interest. So before they opened it in New York, they redesigned the campaign, publicity campaign, and they had a Mad Magazine type poster art designed for it, and these would be in the ads in the newspapers. So that's what they used in New York City, and it got fantastic reviews. Vincent Canby loved it. The film did great business. I saw it in New York City in 1973. I was a big Raymond Chandler fan, and I was really, and an Altman fan. I had liked Brewster McCloud, and McCabe and Mrs. Miller. This was like an exciting movie to go to see, because you knew you weren't going to get the 1940s version of The Long Goodbye, and definitely not of Raymond Chandler. But I think it's a very serious movie. I think Elliott Gould pulls it off. And boy, this is a really strange but very brave performance. As I said before, I think that Lee Brackett really streamlined this movie. Some of the critics didn't like the changes to it, but to me, it takes you a little bit to make the sense of it. But I'll have to say that in 1973, this was my favorite film of all the films I saw in 1973. In 2023, I've still got a few more films to go, but I can almost guarantee you I would still pick The Long Goodbye as my favorite film of 1973. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.